when you look at the numbers among young people and how they feel about Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, and how in just a year's time frame it has fallen off a cliff. This is pretty extraordinary, and I think it has a lot to do with the sense of broken promises, number one, the sense that, you know, he came in, promised, I'm going to be FDR, and I'm going to do all these things, and then one by one, all of these things which were popular and important and would help people get through these difficult times get sort of like ceremonially shot in the head week after week. And so now you have a situation where coming in, young demographics were the strongest supporter of Joe Biden, and now it's completely reversed. Actually, the older you are, the more likely you are to have a favorable opinion of Joe Biden at this point. Young people are despairing of how this administration has ultimately gone for them. Now, that doesn't mean they like the Republicans or are going to vote for them, but are they completely disenchanted with what the Democratic Party led by Joe Biden has done for them? Absolutely. So the Democrats have apparently finally realized that inflation is a major issue and that this is hitting people, giving them a pay cut every single week. Biden gave what was billed as a sort of major address on Tuesday to try to reset the narrative around inflation and lay out what he thinks is going on and what his plans are versus what the Republican plans are. Let's take a listen to a little bit of that.
I know that families all across America are hurting because of inflation. I understand what it feels like. I come from a family where when the price of gas or food went up, we felt it. It was a discussion at the kitchen table. I want every American to know that I'm taking inflation very seriously, and it's my top domestic priority. Let me start with the Putin price hike, high gas prices, and energy prices. My plan is already in motion. I led the world and other countries to join with us to coordinate the largest release of oil from our stockpiles of all the countries in history, 240 million barrels. My plan is to lower everyday costs for hardworking Americans and lower the deficit by asking large corporations. The other path is the ultra MAGA plan put forward by congressional Republicans to raise taxes on working families, lower the income of American workers, threaten sacred programs Americans count on like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and give break after break to big corporations and billionaires, just like they did the last time they were in power.
Well, if there's one thing the Democrats are good at, Saagar, it's coming up with a cringe tagline.
Yeah, Putin price hike is genuinely one of the most cringe things I've ever heard in my entire life.
Ultra MAGA, also pretty bad.
Yeah, what does ultra MAGA mean?
That's the thing is like, if you're
what are you saying?
It doesn't mean, that's the thing, is if you're gonna have a slogan or tagline like this that you're gonna lean into, and by the way, some of the reporting suggests that this came from Bill Clinton's addled mind, because they met last week and it sort of is along the lines of the type of political strategies that he engages. I guess that's the speculation about this. But yeah, for your average person, it doesn't land. It doesn't mean anything really. They're just like, oh, okay. And I mean, he's right. The Republican plan laid out by Rick Scott totally sucks. It would be wildly unpopular.
Right.
It does entail a tax hike for, you know, millions of Americans. It also has this bizarre provision of like, we're gonna sunset every single social welfare, every program every 5 years so that we have to go and re-up Medicare, re-up Medicaid, re-up Social Security. And of course, they're gonna like extract their pound of flesh. He's right about all of this. But this is hardly a confidence-inspiring speech. He only barely called out the corporate price gouging that's going on, and we'll get to a little bit more of that. And you know, he's laid out stuff that they already did, tapping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Okay, well, how much did that do for us? Not a whole heck of a lot. And what he lays out going forward is also really sort of milquetoast, and most of it doesn't have any chance of succeeding in the Senate as it's currently constituted.
Yeah, exactly.
So
he has no plan, zero. And at this point, I don't think we should have any trust in the president's ability in order to do anything about it. And the other point is, I don't really understand what universe these people live in, but you and I both caught this article yesterday. Let's put this up there on the screen about how Representative Katie Katie Porter, who I actually like, she has some great times sometimes when pressing
absolutely.
some of these CEOs in Congress. She says only after Representative Katie Porter put bacon in her cart at the local grocery store did she notice that its price had spiked to $9.99 a pound. Reluctantly, she put the package back. It was a dose of reality that Porter, and a single mom of 3, has long understood. But she's not all sure her Democratic colleagues share her interests. And so she said, only after she gave an emotional speech like last week to the House Democratic Caucus did maybe Congress begin to understand. And here's the thing. As many people pointed out, do you know how to read a poll? This has been the top issue for a year. It's basic. I mean, how much of a bubble are these people living in that they could not understand that stuff is way too expensive all across the board, causing chaos in people's lives, from gas to food to housing, electricity, everything that you have to buy these days is too expensive. This has been self-evident for 18 months, and really, especially in the last year. What planet are you living on? That's what it feels like to me. It's like the theme of Biden's speech, in the Southern New York Times wrote it up, was Biden urges Americans to have patience. No, dude, you run the country. You people literally run it. What are you gonna do for me? Why should I have any trust? And especially, it took one lady buying some bacon in May 2022 for you guys to wake up? I mean, what's happening here?
This story that was crazy, right?
Yeah.
We've been talking about inflation for a long time now. I genuinely don't understand how you could have missed this dynamic. And then purportedly, according to Katie Porter, one of her colleagues said to her, well, it's not showing up in the polls. I'm like,
what?
But that's not even,
what? What
people
are
have
you
been
looking
saying
at?
For how long that inflation is their number one issue. So the whole thing is bizarre. I mean, Katie Porter, obviously she earns a congressional salary, $174,000, which is a lot of money, way more than what your average American earns. But in fairness to her, she has to maintain residence in 2 very expensive locations, and she's a single mom with 3 kids. So it rings true to me that she has to pay a lot more attention to her budget than most members of Congress.
She doesn't have family wealth.
Who are multimillionaires. Most of her colleagues, they can afford to be completely oblivious to whatever the price is of whatever they're buying at the grocery store and whatever the cost at the pump ultimately is. So it does strike me as true that she would be one of the ones who would actually have to pay attention to, oh my God, this pack of bacon is now $10. This is not going to work out for me. But the fact that I can't even believe that it's taken till now for them to really register what a massive problem and total crisis this is for Americans. But we've seen it in the rhetoric. I mean, for how long have we seen them trying to spin the economy and basically say, you don't really understand how good the economy actually is. Right now, the negative numbers are almost as high on, how people feel about the economy as they were during the Great Recession. I mean, that's how dire things are for the American people right now and how much they're feeling the squeeze of every single month their paycheck goes down and down and down in real terms as a result of inflation. So they were trying to paint it as the media is not covering properly how good the economy actually is, and look at how low the unemployment is. But if you have a job, but you can't pay your bills, that's still a really bad economy. That's still a dire situation for you.
Thank you. This is the stuff that drives me. They're like, did you not know that your paycheck went up? It's like, dude, I can't afford the stuff I used to buy. It's simple. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, that is how people think about the economy. And honestly, that's how they should think about the economy. Nobody cares about nominal GDP and GDP per capita when the stuff that you experience in your daily life is more expensive and there's no plan in order to bring it down. And Americans are really unanimous right now in terms of inflation causing a problem, but they don't really agree on what's causing it, which I think is really interesting if you look at how the breakdown is. So here, this is from the New York Times in terms of their polling. Now, a lot of people, about 45%, blame the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that's very fair. So a lot and a little, 45 plus 38. So about 86% of people. Now, supply chain disruption is, again, almost universally agreed upon as a lot or a little in terms of blaming inflation. But things begin to break down a little bit. So 40% of people blame corporations a lot, 38% a little. So again, generally unanimous. But then things start to get real split whenever it comes to policy, Krystal. The American Rescue Plan is 30%. A lot of people blame, probably mostly Republicans. 37% say a little, 30% say not at all. And then the war in Ukraine is also very, very split. The Putin price hike. And so I was just going to say, which one is the administration going with, Krystal? Which of those are they blaming inflation on the most? The one that the least amount of people agree with. And by the way, this is what I love about America. Our people are not stupid. Like, they look at that and they're like, I don't believe you. And you shouldn't. They're like, stuff has been way more expensive before Russia invaded Ukraine. Don't gaslight me.
Yeah.
Most people are like, yeah, I think it's COVID and I think it's supply. Now look, we can all disagree on why exactly that is, but some 80 to 90% of Americans are not dumb. They're like, yeah, there's a supply problem. There's all this crazy stuff going on with China. And also the pandemic is kind of crazy. And of course the administration goes with the war in Ukraine to blame this stuff on. It's nuts.
Well, because that puts it totally
off them.
And even that, though, is disingenuous because obviously we are very involved, and we're going to talk in the next block about this more, but we are very involved in what's going on in Ukraine. And this administration has set a policy of we don't actually want the war to end. We want the war to continue with, dire consequences for Ukraine and Ukrainian lives, and also dire consequences for Americans and what they are ultimately paying at the pump and paying, in terms of food prices. But to your point, the reason people are not going with that explanation, I think they buy like, okay, that has something to do with what's going on right now, but obviously inflation was going up before the war started.
Exactly.
So we're like, we didn't forget.
Dumb, man. Gas was still $3.50 a gallon.
Right. The Putin price hike. But that's their way of being like, not on us. It's Russia's fault. It's Putin's fault, as is apparently everything that happens in this country bad ever to Democrats. And, Stoller has really been laser focused on how much of this has to do also with corporations who have monopoly power looking at this landscape and saying, aha, we can use this as an excuse to further raise prices. And here's some more numbers to back that up. He says this is a very weird inflationary period with an unusually large share going to profits and an unusually small share going to wages. So this is yet another indication. They have 54% of normal and recent contributions to growth in unit prices in the non-financial corporate sector. 54% of that is going to corporate profits, and only 8% is going to labor. So overwhelmingly, the increase in prices and costs is not coming from, a lot of times you hear this from the right, like, oh, wages are going up and that means that everything's going to be more expensive. No, that is not what's going on here whatsoever. Wages have gone up a little bit, not even close to enough to keep up with inflation. Meanwhile, corporate profits are skyrocketing, and no surprise, given that we've heard CEOs saying basically like, this is a great time for us because we can lift prices and consumers just have to take it, and they will take it because they understand that inflation is happening right now. So again, it was frustrating to me because that is, of everything that's going on in the world and contributing to inflation, that corporate price gouging part is actually the part that the White House could do the most about.
Yes.
And so the fact that they, he had like one line about it. He said that the two major causes are COVID supply chain and Putin's price hike. Buried in the speech is like, oh, and by the way, corporations are lifting their prices too much. But that's the piece you should actually be really focusing on because, number one, it's clearly a significant contributor here, and number two, it's something that the administration could do a lot more about than say, whether or not Shanghai is locked down right now.
I feel like I'm just repeating myself over and over again. But, I was talking with some friends yesterday. Like, the Biden administration should declare a national emergency over the baby formula shortage right now, invoke the Defense Production Act, talk to the FDA, and say, hey, what's the problem? Okay, Abbott Foods isn't producing enough. What can we do? Oh, Europe has a ton of baby formula. Let's go buy some. This is one of those most basic functions of government. These are little kids. And then expand that across all of the entire economy. The meatpacking thing. I was talking about this with some friends yesterday. What happened to that investigation? They ordered some investigation in the meat packing supply chain. That was 6-7 months ago.
Yeah.
So what's happening? I mean,
Right.
meat is still really expensive.
Yeah.
And these are the, tip of the spear types of things that you could do to affect the economy. But, they're focused on other things right now.
By the way, we learned on the baby formula shortage. I might do my Monday monologue on this because this is just so enraging, but also so perfect. Part of what happened and why there is such a disastrous shortage right now and why moms and babies are, it's horrible. I can't imagine being in that situation where you don't know where you're going to get your baby's next meal.
Yeah.
Horrible. Abbott had to recall all of their formula, or a significant amount of their formula, because you had 4 babies who had a bacterial infection, 2 of whom died. And now we're learning that apparently they had refused to repair dilapidated drying machines, and that, made their plants into potential petri dishes for these bacterial infections. At the same time, Saagar, though, they didn't want to take the money to invest in actually making sure that babies are safe. Instead, they did invest $5.73 billion in stock buybacks.
I was going to say, she's about to say stock buyback.
Stock buybacks.
Yeah, every time.
Too perfect.
This is a good example, though. This is about monopolization, which is that Abbott has a direct contract with WIC, the WIC program, which we talked about earlier. We need more competition in this sector. And I've now known much more about baby formula than I ever did in my life. But, I was telling you, there's a wealthy black market for European baby formula. A lot of Instagram moms are obsessed with European baby formula because it doesn't have plant-based additives like ours and has more, whatever. We don't have to get into all of the science on it. But the point is that there's already an existing market here for European baby formula. Now, look, I'm a protectionist at heart, but if we don't have it and we have a crisis, let's go get some. I mean, these are not hard things to do. I was also reading that there are certain facilities and others that we could easily convert if Biden invoked the Defense Production Act in order to spin up baby formula production. Instead, thumb up the you-know-what over at the administration doing absolutely nothing. And I got 2 friends actually right now of newborn infants, and both of them texting me about how much, one of them is a prepper actually, so he foresaw this crisis and he's got like 3 months, but he's like, hey, listen, man, I don't know what I'm gonna do after 3 months. He goes, I really hope that, there's not still short. His wife is freaking out, talking to him about it. I don't want to be in that. I can't imagine being in that situation.
Yeah, I was reading about moms who have babies who have allergies, or particularly if it's one thing. Right. I mean, this is bad for everybody, and there are states where it's as much as 50% out of stock. I mean, if you go on Amazon, for example, you can't possibly buy it. But if you need a specific kind of formula for your baby in particular, it is a really, really bad situation. Of course, it's even worse if you are low income and it's hard for you to afford it to start with, and then prices are skyrocketing. So, I mean, I can't imagine a more clear-cut instance of this is a complete crisis. We have to do something about it now. Like, if that isn't a clear-cut case for whatever it takes, like, go and buy the baby formula in Europe, bring it here, give it out for free, Defense Production Act, whatever you ultimately have to do. And the last thing I'll say about all of this is, the whole promise of this particular system of sort of like radical free market capitalism that we have is that, listen, yes, corporations are going to get rich. Yes, your jobs are going to get shipped overseas. That's all true. But your prices are going to be low. And you're never going to have to worry about like the, food crises that they have in communist countries. That's not going to happen here. Well, guess what? You got the jobs shipped overseas and you still had prices increase. You're still paying too much. So none of the promises of this system, the way that it was architected, have ultimately come true. And, I think that's a big learning to take from all of this as we move forward.
Huge learning. And, I was reading yesterday about these moms on Facebook groups who are having to like swap breast milk. And I'm like, that is some failed state, like 1915
Completely.
Stuff. I can't even imagine it.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.